I hated the millionaire for forcing me to marry, but his jealousy awakened a love I never expected. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She had dreamed of this moment for exactly 730 days. Isabella Clarke stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse she had never chosen to call home, watching the Seattle skyline blur through the morning rain. Her dark fingers traced the edges of the manila envelope that would change everything. Inside, crisp legal papers waited, divorce documents that had taken her 3 months to prepare in secret. At 30, Isabella possessed the kind of natural beauty that turned heads without effort. Her rich mahogany skin glowed even in the grey morning light, and her hair fell in soft, defined curls just past her shoulders, a style she'd maintained despite Damien's subtle preference for straighter looks. She wore a simple cream blouse and dark jeans, clothes that made her feel like herself, rather than the polished trophy wife she'd been molded into. The sound of expensive leather shoes against marble announced his arrival before she saw him. Damien Johnson entered the living room with the same commanding presence that had dominated boardrooms across the Pacific Northwest for over a decade. At 37, he was undeniably striking, 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled his tailored navy suit perfectly. His dark brown hair was styled with precision, and his piercing blue eyes missed nothing. Those eyes had built an empire worth hundreds of millions, but they had never truly seen her. "You're up early," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of polite disinterest as he adjusted his platinum cufflinks. Isabella turned slowly, the envelope still in her hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "We need to talk." Something in her tone made him pause. For the first time in months, his attention wasn't divided between his phone and whatever she was saying. His gaze dropped to the manila envelope, and she saw the slightest tightening around his eyes. "What's that?" "Freedom," she said simply. The word hung between them like a challenge. Damien set his phone face down on the granite kitchen island, a gesture so unusual it felt monumental. When he looked at her again, his expression was unreadable. "Isabella, do you remember our wedding day?" she interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "You stood there in your perfect tuxedo, said your perfect vows, and looked right through me like I was invisible, like I was just another business acquisition." His jaw tightened. "That's not true?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Damien, in 2 years of marriage, you've never asked me what I want for breakfast. You've never asked what I dream about. Hell, you probably don't even know my middle name." "Rose," he said quietly. "Your middle name is Rose, after your grandmother." The unexpected answer caught her off guard, but she pushed forward. "Knowing facts about me isn't the same as knowing me." She held out the envelope. "I want a divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the Seattle rain intensified, drumming against the windows like an urgent heartbeat. Damien stared at the envelope as if it contained a bomb, rather than legal documents. "You can't be serious," he finally said. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Isabella's voice didn't waver, though inside she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Our families made this arrangement. They got what they wanted. Your company's merger with my father's firm went through beautifully. Mission accomplished." "Isabella, I'm filing with or without your signature," she continued, "but I thought you deserved to hear it from me first. Professional courtesy." The word professional seemed to strike him like a physical blow. His composure cracked just enough for her to glimpse something raw underneath, surprise, perhaps even hurt. But it was gone so quickly, she might have imagined it. "What do you want?" His voice had turned cold, businessman-like. "Money? Property? Name your price." The question hit her like a slap. After everything, he still thought this was about money. "I want my life back," she said softly. "I want to wake up in the morning and not feel like I'm suffocating. I want to laugh without wondering if it's too loud. I want to exist as something more than your beautiful, well-behaved wife who looks good at charity galas and stays quiet during dinner parties." Something flickered across his features. Was it regret? But his mask slipped back into place so quickly she couldn't be sure. "Fine." The word came out clipped, final. "I'll have my lawyers review the papers." He reached for the envelope, but as his fingers brushed hers, Isabella felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. For a split second, their eyes met, and she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. But then he pulled away. The moment shattered. "I'll be staying at the Fairmont until this is resolved," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. Damien nodded curtly, already reaching for his phone. I'll have Marcus handle the details. Of course. Even their divorce would be handled by his assistant. Isabella picked up the small suitcase she'd packed the night before, just enough clothes for a few days, her grandmother's jewelry, and the photo of her parents' real wedding, where love had been present in every smile. At the door she paused. For what it's worth, Damien, I really did try to love you. She didn't wait for a response. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Isabella didn't see Damien standing frozen in the living room, staring at the divorce papers with an expression that would have shocked her. She didn't see his hands shake slightly as he read her demands, which asked for almost nothing except her freedom, and she certainly didn't see him sink into the chair by the window, looking lost for the first time in his perfectly controlled life. The elevator descended toward the parking garage, carrying Isabella toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Behind her, in the penthouse that had never felt like home, Damien Johnson was about to discover that some things in life couldn't be controlled, bought, or negotiated. Some things, once lost, were impossible to replace. The Fairmont Olympic hotel room felt like a sanctuary, even if it was temporary. Isabella set her suitcase on the king-sized bed and took her first deep breath in what felt like years. The space was elegant but warm, nothing like the cold perfection of Damien's penthouse. Here she could actually touch the decorative pillows without worrying about disturbing some invisible order. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend Zara. "Girl, you actually did it?" Isabella smiled, typing back, "Papers delivered this morning. I'm free." The word free looked strange on her screen, like a foreign language she was just learning to speak. She walked to the window overlooking Elliott Bay, where ferries cut through the grey water like white brushstrokes on canvas. 2 years ago, she would have found the view romantic. Now it just looked like possibility. Her phone rang, Zara, of course. "Isabella Rose Clark," Zara's voice burst through the speaker before Isabella could even say hello. "I cannot believe you finally grew the ovaries to leave that ice sculpture you married." "Hello to you too, Zara." Isabella laughed despite herself. It felt good to laugh without measuring the volume. "Seriously though, how are you holding up? And don't you dare say fine, because I know you and I know this couldn't have been easy." Isabella sank into the plush armchair by the window. "I'm relieved, terrified. Both?" She paused. "He knew my middle name, Zara. After 2 years of treating me like furniture, he knew my middle name. Honey, that's not love, that's basic information retention. My dentist knows my middle name. Your dentist is also secretly in love with you. Dr. Peterson is 65 and married. Age is just a number," Isabella teased, feeling some of her old self returning. "Don't deflect. We're talking about you and the iceberg. What did he say when you handed him the papers?" Isabella closed her eyes, remembering Damien's expression, the way his mask had slipped for just a moment. "He asked me what I wanted. Money, property, like everything has a price tag. Typical. Did you tell him what you really want?" "I told him I want my life back." "Good. And what are you going to do with this life you're getting back?" The question hung in the air. For 2 years, Isabella had focused so intently on escaping that she hadn't fully considered what came after. She'd saved money secretly, opened her own bank account, but beyond that, "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Maybe I'll travel. Remember how we talked about backpacking through Europe after college? Before you got swept up in the whole merger-marriage situation," Zara said dryly. "It wasn't supposed to be forever," Isabella said quietly. "My father promised it was just business, just until the companies were stable together. He said a year, maybe 2 at most. And then what? Damien would magically decide he didn't need a wife anymore." Isabella didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. Her father had sold her future for a business deal, and she'd been too young and too trusting to see it clearly. "You know what?" Zara's voice turned fierce. "Forget the past. You're 30 years old, you're gorgeous, you're brilliant, and you're finally free to figure out who Isabella Clark really is when she's not playing the perfect wife." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Hold on, Zara." Isabella peered through the peephole and saw a hotel employee holding an enormous bouquet of white roses, easily 3 dozen of them. "Miss Clark, delivery for you." She opened the door, accepting the flowers with confusion. The young man handed her a small card before disappearing down the hallway. "Who's sending you flowers?" Zara asked, as Isabella settled back into her chair. Isabella opened the card, her heart stopping at the familiar handwriting. "These were in our lobby every week for 2 years. I never knew you hated them." "Oh my God," Isabella whispered. "What? What does it say?" Isabella stared at the card. She did hate white roses. They reminded her of funerals. She'd mentioned it once, casually, during their 3rd month of marriage when she'd commented on the weekly flower delivery to their building. She'd thought he wasn't listening. He never seemed to be listening. But he had been. For 2 years, he'd known she hated the flowers that arrived like clockwork, and he'd said nothing. "Bella, you're scaring me. What does the card say?" He remembered something I said about white roses, something I mentioned 2 years ago. "That's," Zara paused, "actually kind of sweet, in a weird, emotionally constipated way." Isabella set the flowers on the desk, as far from her as possible. "It doesn't change anything. Remembering details isn't the same as caring about someone. But maybe..." "No maybes, Zara. I spent 2 years making excuses for him, finding hidden meanings in his silence. I won't do it anymore." Even as she said it, something twisted in her chest. Why would he send flowers he knew she hated, unless it meant something else entirely? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to discuss the terms. Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m. D." "He wants to have dinner tomorrow," Isabella told Zara, "about the divorce terms. Are you going to go?" Isabella looked at the white roses, then at the city spreading out below her window. Somewhere out there, Damien was probably in his office, believing he could negotiate his way out of this like any other business deal. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm going to go, and I'm going to make it very clear that this isn't a negotiation. It's a done deal." But even as she said the words, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's dinner was going to change everything again. And deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, she wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her. She almost changed her mind 3 times. Isabella stood in front of the hotel mirror, adjusting the emerald green dress she'd bought that afternoon, the first piece of clothing she'd chosen in 2 years, without considering whether Damien would approve. The silk hugged her curves in all the right places, and the color made her dark skin glow. She looked like herself again. Her phone buzzed. "You got this, Queen. Show him what he's losing." Zara Isabella smiled, applying a final coat of lipstick in a bold burgundy shade she'd never dared wear around Damien. Tonight, she wasn't Mrs. Johnson. She was Isabella Clarke, and she was about to close the most important deal of her life. The restaurant Damien had chosen was Le Bernardin's sister location in Seattle, exclusive, expensive, and exactly the kind of place where he felt most comfortable conducting business. Isabella arrived exactly on time, refusing to give him the satisfaction of waiting. He was already there. Damien rose from the corner table as she approached, and for a moment, something flickered across his perfectly composed features. His eyes took in her dress, her hair, loose and natural instead of the sleek styles he preferred, and lingered a fraction too long before meeting her gaze. "Isabella." He moved to pull out her chair, a gesture that had once seemed thoughtful but now felt performative. "Damien." She sat without acknowledging his courtesy, placing her purse deliberately on the table between them like a barrier. He looked different somehow, still impeccably dressed in his charcoal suit and silver tie, still radiating that quiet authority that commanded every room he entered. But there were subtle changes, the slight tension around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed once against the table before he caught himself. "You look," he started, then stopped. "Different," she supplied coolly. "Beautiful." The word came out rougher than he'd intended. Isabella felt a dangerous flutter in her chest and quickly suppressed it. "Let's just get to business, shall we? I assume you've reviewed the papers." Damien signaled the waiter, ordering wine without asking her preference, a vintage Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly salary, another reminder of the world she was leaving behind. "I've reviewed them," he said once they were alone again. "Your terms are surprisingly reasonable." Meaning most women in your position would ask for half of everything. You're asking for almost nothing. Isabella leaned back in her chair. "Maybe because I don't want anything from you except my freedom." The waiter returned with the wine, going through the elaborate tasting ritual with Damien, while Isabella watched the other diners. A young couple at the neighboring table was sharing dessert, laughing over some private joke. The woman had chocolate on her lip and her partner reached over to gently wipe it away. Such a simple gesture, but full of tenderness. Isabella looked away. "The house in Bellingham," Damien said once the waiter left. "You're not asking for it. It's your house. We spent our honeymoon there." "No, Damien. You conducted business calls there while I sat on the beach alone. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "I had 3 major acquisitions closing that week. You couldn't just be present for your new wife." Isabella's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath. "How you couldn't just turn off your phone for 1 week?" Business doesn't stop because what? Because you got married? No, you're right. It doesn't. But a marriage does stop when only one person is participating. Their meals arrived. Pan-seared halibut for her, duck for him. The food was exquisite, but Isabella barely tasted it. She was too focused on the way Damien kept looking at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. "Why now?" he asked suddenly. "What do you mean? Why are you leaving now? What changed?" Isabella set down her fork. "I woke up last Tuesday morning and realized I couldn't remember the last time you looked at me. Really looked at me. Not through me or past me, but at me. And I realized I'd stopped looking at myself too." "Isabella, do you know what I wanted to be when I was little?" she continued. "A photographer. I wanted to travel the world and capture moments that mattered. Real moments, not staged corporate headshots or charity gala publicity shots." Damien's hand stilled on his wineglass. "You never told me that. You never asked." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Isabella watched Damien's jaw work as if he was fighting some internal battle. "What if—" he started, then stopped. "What if what? What if things were different? What if we tried again?" Isabella felt something crack inside her chest. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it. Damien without his walls, actually present, actually seeing her. But then reality crashed back. "Different how, Damien? You'd still be you, driven, ambitious, married to your work, and I'd still be the inconvenient wife who wants more than you're willing to give. You don't know what I'm willing to give, because you've never shown me." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, causing nearby diners to glance their way. Isabella lowered her voice. 2 years, Damien. I've had 2 years to figure out what you're willing to give, and it's not enough." He leaned forward, and for the first time all evening, his mask slipped completely. "What if I told you I made a mistake?" Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain steady. "I'd say it's too late for regrets." "Is it?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Isabella saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Vulnerability, maybe even desperation. It would be so easy to say no, to give him another chance, to believe that love could grow from the ashes of their arrangement. But she'd spent 2 years hoping for scraps of affection from a man who gave her everything except the one thing she needed. "Yes," she said quietly, "it is." Damien sat back as if she'd slapped him. His composure returned like armor sliding back into place, but not before she caught a glimpse of something that looked like heartbreak. "I'll sign the papers," he said finally. Isabella nodded, surprised by the hollow feeling in her chest. This was what she wanted. This was freedom. So why did it feel like losing? She was gathering her purse when Damien spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "For what it's worth, Isabella, I did see you. Every damn day, I saw you." Isabella paused at the edge of the table, her heart stuttering, but she didn't turn around. "Then why did you make me feel invisible?" She didn't wait for an answer. The courier arrived at exactly 9 a.m., just as Isabella was finishing her second cup of coffee. She'd spent a restless night replaying Damien's words. "I did see you. Every damn day I saw you," and trying to understand what he'd meant. If he'd seen her, truly seen her, then why had she felt so desperately alone? "Package for Isabella Clark," the young man announced, holding out a manila envelope that looked identical to the one she'd given Damien 3 days ago. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she signed for it. This was it, the end of the most complicated chapter of her life. She waited until the courier left before opening the envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, signed in Damien's precise handwriting, along with a handwritten note on his personal letterhead. "Isabella, I've instructed my lawyers to expedite the process. You should be free within 30 days. The photographer exhibition at the Seattle Art Museum opens next Friday. You always loved photography. D." Isabella stared at the note until the words blurred. He remembered. After 2 years of what felt like complete indifference, he remembered that she loved photography. Her phone buzzed, Zara calling for their daily check-in. "Please tell me you're not crying over signed divorce papers," Zara said without preamble. "I'm not crying." Isabella wiped her eyes quickly, even though Zara couldn't see her. "I'm just processing." "Processing what? You're free. This is celebration time, not crying time." Isabella walked to the window, watching Seattle wake up below. He included a note about a photography exhibition. "Oh no, please tell me you're not reading into some throwaway comment about art." "It's not throwaway, Zara. In 2 years he never once acknowledged my interests. Never. And now, When he's signing papers to end our marriage, he mentions photography? Maybe he's feeling guilty? Or maybe— Isabella paused, not wanting to voice the thought that had been nagging at her all morning. Maybe what? Maybe he was paying attention all along and I just didn't see it. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Isabella checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Bella," Zara said finally, her voice gentle but firm. "Paying attention isn't the same as being present. A stalker pays attention too, but that doesn't make it love." The harsh comparison made Isabella wince, but she understood Zara's point. Still, something about the note felt different, personal in a way that Damien never was. "I know you're right," Isabella said. "It's just confusing." "You know what's not confusing? The fact that you're about to be legally free from a man who treated you like a business acquisition. Don't let one note about photography make you forget 2 years of emotional neglect." After they hung up, Isabella tried to focus on her future. She'd already started looking at apartments, small cozy places that felt nothing like the sterile perfection of Damien's penthouse, places where she could put mismatched furniture and colorful throw pillows without worrying about disrupting some invisible aesthetic. But her eyes kept drifting back to the note. "You always loved photography, always," as if he'd been cataloging her interests the entire time, storing them away for— What? Why mention it now when it was too late? By noon she'd convinced herself that Zara was right. It was guilt, nothing more. A gesture meant to ease Damien's conscience as he signed away their marriage. By 2 p.m., she'd changed her mind again. By 4 p.m., she was standing in front of the Seattle Art Museum. The exhibition was called Invisible Moments, photographs that captured the spaces between heartbeats, the split seconds when people revealed their truest selves without realizing it. A mother's hand smoothing her child's hair, an elderly man feeding pigeons with a secret smile, a woman laughing so hard she'd forgotten to be self-conscious. Isabella moved through the gallery in a trance, studying each image with the intensity of someone seeing color for the first time. This was what she'd dreamed of doing, finding beauty in ordinary moments, telling stories without words. "I thought I might find you here." Isabella spun around, her heart lurching. Damien stood near the entrance, looking oddly uncertain. He'd traded his usual business suit for dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made his blue eyes even more striking. It was the most casual she'd ever seen him, and the effect was disarming. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Same thing you are, I imagine, looking at photographs." "That's not what I meant." Damien approached slowly, as if she might bolt at any sudden movement. "I come here sometimes, when I need to think." "You come to photography exhibitions to think?" Something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "I started coming after our 3rd month of marriage. You mentioned this place once, said you used to spend hours here during college." Isabella's breath caught. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you've ever told me, Isabella. Every story, every preference, every dream you've shared." His voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. I never knew how to respond to them." She stared at him, trying to reconcile this version of Damien with the man who'd spent 2 years treating their conversations like business meetings. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I've never been good at this, at caring about someone, at being cared about." He looked down at his hands. "My parents' marriage was a merger too, and love was treated like weakness in my house. I thought if I kept my distance, if I didn't let myself feel too much, I could protect us both." "Protect us from what?" "From me disappointing you the way I disappoint everyone eventually." The confession hung between them like a bridge Isabella wasn't sure she should cross. This vulnerability was so different from the controlled businessman she'd married that it felt like meeting a stranger. "Damien, I know it's too late," he said quickly. "I know I lost my chance, but I needed you to know that the distance wasn't because I didn't see you. It was because I saw you too clearly, and I knew I wasn't enough." Isabella felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to make me the villain for leaving when you're the one who built the walls." "I'm not trying to make you the villain. I'm trying to make you understand." "Understand what? That you cared but chose to hurt me anyway? That you saw me but decided to make me feel invisible? That makes it worse, Damien, not better." He flinched as if she'd hit him. "You're right, I'm sorry, I wanted you to know the truth before we both moved on." Isabella turned back to the photographs, her vision blurring. A part of her wanted to forgive him, to believe that understanding his reasons could somehow erase the pain of the past 2 years. But another part, the part that had found the strength to leave, knew that explanations couldn't undo damage. "The papers are signed," she said without looking at him. We'll both be free soon. When she turned around, he was gone. But on the bench where he'd been standing, he'd left something, a small wrapped package with another note, for when you're ready to start capturing those invisible moments again. Inside was a vintage Leica camera, perfectly restored and obviously expensive, the kind of camera she'd dreamed of owning since college, but could never afford. Isabella sank onto the bench, holding the camera like it might shatter. It was the most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given her, and it came from the man she was divorcing. Nothing about this made sense anymore. The apartment key felt heavier than it should have. Isabella stood outside the bright yellow door of her new Capitol Hill studio, holding the Leica camera in one hand and her future in the other. It was a cozy space, nothing like the penthouse's cold grandeur. The hardwood floors creaked in friendly places. The windows faced west for perfect sunset light, and there was a reading nook that begged for mismatched cushions and a pile of photography books. It was hers, completely, utterly hers. So why did she feel so empty? "Please tell me you're not having second thoughts about the apartment," Zara said, appearing at the top of the stairs with her arms full of moving boxes. "Because I already helped you carry half your life up 2 flights of stairs, and I'm not doing it again." Isabella managed to smile. "No second thoughts. I love it." "Then why do you look like someone stole your favorite puppy?" Isabella held up the camera. "He gave me this at the museum." Zara nearly dropped the boxes. "He was at the museum." "Girl, are you being stalked by your soon-to-be ex-husband?" "I don't think so. He said he goes there to think." Isabella followed Zara inside, setting the camera carefully on the kitchen counter. "He knew I'd be there, because he's been paying attention to your patterns for 2 years. That's not romantic, Bella. That's concerning." "But what if—" "No." Zara set down the boxes with enough force to rattle the contents. "No what-ifs. We've been through this. The man had 2 years to show you he cared, and instead he made you feel like a ghost in your own marriage. One expensive camera doesn't erase that." Isabella knew Zara was right, but the camera seemed to mock her from its place on the counter. It was exactly the model she'd mentioned wanting in a photography magazine she'd left open on their coffee table 18 months ago. She'd assumed Damien hadn't noticed, but he had. He'd noticed everything. The afternoon passed in a blur of unpacking and arranging. Isabella hung colourful curtains, actual colour, not the muted beiges and greys Damien preferred. She put out her grandmother's quilt, her collection of vintage postcards, and a small succulent garden that would never survive in the penthouse's air-conditioned perfection. By evening, the space looked like her, vibrant, warm, slightly chaotic in all the right ways. "Much better," Zara declared, flopping onto the second-hand sofa they'd found at an estate sale. "This place has personality. It has soul. It has character flaws," Isabella corrected, pointing to the slightly warped doorframe and the bathroom tiles that didn't quite match. "Exactly. Just like real people do." They ordered Thai food and ate it straight from the containers, while sitting on the floor, something Isabella would never have done in the penthouse. Every bite tasted like freedom. "So what's the plan now?" Zara asked around a mouthful of pad thai. "Job hunting, dating, taking over the world." "Photography," Isabella said without hesitation. "I want to build a portfolio, maybe start freelancing." "With the stalker camera?" Isabella glared at her. "It's not a stalker camera. It's a very expensive, very thoughtful gift from someone who what? Who loves you? If Damien Johnson loves you, he has a funny way of showing it." Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hope the apartment feels like home. D." Both women stared at the phone. "How does he know you moved in today?" Zara asked slowly. Isabella's stomach dropped. I don't know." "Bella, this is getting weird. How does he know where you live? How does he know you moved today? Maybe he had someone watch the hotel." Isabella's voice was small. "To know when I left? That's not better, that's worse." Another text came through. "I'm not watching you. Your father mentioned you were apartment hunting." I put 2 and 2 together. "He's listening to our conversations somehow," Zara said, her voice rising. "No, look." Isabella showed her the phone. "He texted again. He says my father told him." "Your father?" Zara's expression shifted from alarm to disgust. "Right. Because those two are still business partners. How convenient." Isabella felt sick. Of course her father would keep Damien informed. The merger between their companies was still more important to him than his daughter's happiness. A third text. "I'm not trying to intrude on your new life. I just wanted to make sure you were safe." "Safe from what?" Isabella muttered. As if summoned by her words, there was a sharp knock at the door. Both women froze. "You expecting anyone?" Zara whispered. Isabella shook her head, creeping toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery driver holding a large bag that smelled amazing. "Food delivery for Isabella Clark," the man announced when she opened the door. "From Cafe Vita. Already paid for." "I didn't order anything," Isabella said, but the driver was already heading back down the stairs. Inside the bag were containers of what looked like gourmet comfort food, mac and cheese with truffle oil, garlic bread, chocolate chip cookies still warm from the oven. There was also a note. "Figured you'd be too tired to cook properly on your first night. Welcome home." Zara picked up one of the cookies and took a bite before she could stop herself. "Okay, that's actually really good, but also really creepy." "It's thoughtful," Isabella said weakly. "It's controlling. He's monitoring your location, sending you gifts, showing up places you go. Bella, this is textbook." "It's not like that," Isabella interrupted. "You don't know him like I do. Apparently you don't know him like you thought you did either." The words hit harder than Zara probably intended. Isabella sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. I'm so confused, Zara. For 2 years, I felt invisible. Now I feel like I'm under a microscope." "Because you are, and that's not healthy." Isabella's phone buzzed again. "I'm sorry if the food was presumptuous. I'll stop. You deserve to start fresh without me hovering." She stared at the message, torn between relief and something that felt suspiciously like disappointment. "What does it say?" Zara asked. "He's going to stop. The texts, the gifts, everything. Good." "Yeah," Isabella said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Good." She set the phone aside and tried to focus on the cookies, but they tasted like confusion now. For 2 years, she'd begged for Damien's attention. Now that she had it, she didn't know what to do with it. Outside her new apartment, the city hummed with late-night energy. People were living their lives, making choices, moving forward. She was supposed to be one of them now, free, independent, ready to rediscover who she was when she wasn't defined by someone else's expectations. So why did freedom feel so much like loneliness? Isabella picked up the Leica camera, feeling its weight in her hands. Through the viewfinder, her new apartment looked different, warmer, more hopeful. Maybe Zara was right. Maybe it was time to stop looking backward and start capturing new moments. But as she focused the lens, she couldn't shake the feeling that the most important moments of her story were still being written. And she wasn't sure if she was the only author anymore. She wasn't supposed to be there. Isabella adjusted the strap of her emerald cocktail dress and checked her reflection one last time in the hotel lobby mirror. The annual Pacific Northwest Business Leaders Gala had been a fixture in her calendar for 2 years, as Damien's wife. Tonight, she was here as Isabella Clark, freelance photographer, hired to capture candid moments for the event organizers. It was her first professional photography job since the divorce papers were filed, and she was determined to prove she belonged here on her own merit. The Leica hung around her neck, its weight both comforting and nerve-wracking. She'd spent the past week learning every setting, every nuance of the vintage camera. It felt like holding a piece of history, and tonight it would help her create some. "Isabella?" She turned to find Marcus Webb, Damien's assistant, approaching with his usual polished smile. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." "Working," she said simply, lifting the camera slightly. "Henderson Events hired me to photograph the evening." Something flickered across Marcus's features. Surprise, maybe concern. "Does Mr. Johnson know?" "Why would that matter? We're getting divorced, Marcus, not declaring war." But even as she said it, Isabella felt a flutter of nervousness. She hadn't considered that Damien might react poorly to seeing her here. This was his world, after all. These were his colleagues, his clients, his domain. "Of course," Marcus said quickly. "I just meant, well, it might be awkward. It's only if we make it awkward." The ballroom was already filling with Seattle's business elite when Isabella entered. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, capturing unguarded moments. A tech CEO laughing at his wife's joke, a real estate mogul nervously adjusting his tie before a presentation, 2 rival company heads sharing what looked like a genuine conversation by the bar. Through her lens, she saw a different side of these powerful people. They weren't titans of industry in these moments. They were just humans trying to navigate a social event. "Excuse me, are you the photographer?" Isabella turned to find a striking woman in her 40s extending a manicured hand. "Eleanor Hartwell, Hartwell and Associates. I've been admiring your work tonight. Thank you." "Isabella Clark." "Clark?" Eleanor's eyes lit up with recognition. "You're Robert Clark's daughter, and you're also..." Getting divorced, yes. Isabella had learned to cut off that conversation quickly. But tonight I'm just a photographer. Well, you're a talented one. That shot you took of Senator Morrison with his granddaughter was beautiful, very natural. Isabella smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. This was what she'd been missing. Recognition for her own skills, her own work, not just as an extension of someone else's success. I'd love to discuss some freelance work with you, Eleanor continued. We're always looking for good photographers for our corporate events. They were exchanging business cards when Isabella felt it, that familiar shift in the room's energy that meant Damien had arrived. She didn't need to turn around to know he was there. After 2 years of marriage, she'd developed an almost supernatural awareness of his presence. When she finally did look, her breath caught. Damien stood near the entrance in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, commanding attention without effort, but it wasn't his usual confident demeanor that made her stare. It was the way his eyes immediately found her across the crowded room, as if he'd been searching for her the moment he walked in. For a heartbeat, they looked at each other across the space that might as well have been an ocean. Isabella saw something flicker across his features, surprise, pleasure, maybe even pride as he took in her professional setup and the way she moved confidently through his world. Then someone approached him, breaking the spell, and Isabella forced herself to look away. That's some serious tension, Eleanor murmured, following her gaze. It's complicated, Isabella said, lifting her camera to capture a group toast happening nearby. The best stories usually are. Isabella spent the next hour avoiding Damien's side of the room, focusing on her work. She photographed the keynote speaker, the award presentations, the networking clusters that formed and reformed like dancers changing partners. Through her lens, she felt powerful, invisible, completely in control, until she wasn't. Isabella. She turned to find Damien directly behind her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, that familiar blend of cedar and bergamot that used to make her feel safe. Damien. She lowered her camera, suddenly hyper-aware of every eye in the vicinity watching them. Having a good evening? Better now. His voice was low, meant only for her. You look beautiful, professional, in your element. The compliment caught her off guard. It wasn't the polite, distant praise he used to give her at these events. This felt genuine. Thank you. I should get back to work. Of course. But he didn't move away. Isabella, I wanted to tell you... Mr. Johnson, a booming voice interrupted, as Harold Peterson, CEO of Peterson Manufacturing, approached with his arms wide. There's someone I'd like you to meet. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, Harold. Isabella, we'll talk later. It wasn't a question. Isabella watched him get pulled into the networking crowd, noting how easily he slipped back into his role as the charming, powerful businessman. But something was different. Every few minutes his eyes would find her across the room, following her movements with an intensity that made her skin tingle. She was photographing the dessert table when she felt someone else watching her. A tall man with sandy hair and an easy smile approached, champagne flute in hand. So you must be the photographer everyone's talking about, he said. I'm James Crawford, Crawford Tech Solutions. Isabella Clark, nice to meet you. The pleasure's all mine. You know, I've been watching you work tonight, and I have to say, you have an incredible eye. Very intuitive. Isabella felt herself blush. Thank you, that's very kind. I'm serious. Most event photographers just point and shoot, but you're really seeing people, capturing their essence. James moved closer, his voice warm with genuine admiration. It's quite impressive. Photography has always been my passion, Isabella found herself saying. I'm just starting to pursue it professionally. Well, if you ever need someone to practice on... James's smile was flirtatious but not pushy. I'd be happy to volunteer as a subject. Isabella laughed, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. That's very generous of you. It's selfish, actually. It would give me an excuse to see you again. Before Isabella could respond, she felt a presence behind her, a familiar tension that made the air itself seem to thicken. Crawford. Damien's voice was perfectly polite, but Isabella heard the steel underneath. Johnson, hell of a party. I was just complimenting your photographer here on her excellent work. Isabella felt Damien's gaze burning into her profile, but she kept her eyes on James. Yes, Damien said slowly. Isabella is very talented. The way he said her name, with a possessiveness that had no right to exist between two people getting divorced, made something hot and dangerous coil in Isabella's stomach. I was just telling her that if she ever needs a subject to practice on, James continued, oblivious to the growing tension. "How generous," Damien replied, and Isabella didn't need to look to know his smile was razor sharp. "Actually," Isabella said, raising her camera and turning toward Damien with a bright smile, "I could use some practice shots right now. James, would you mind?" She saw Damien's eyes flash with something that looked suspiciously like jealousy as James moved to pose beside her. "Smile," she instructed, but her eyes were on Damien as she said it. The look he gave her was anything but friendly, and for the first time in 2 years, Isabella felt like she had his complete, undivided attention. She should have seen it coming. Isabella was packing her camera equipment when Damien appeared beside her table like a storm cloud, his perfectly composed facade finally cracking at the edges. The gala was winding down, guests filtering out in clusters of expensive laughter and business card exchanges, but his attention was laser-focused on her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and tight with barely controlled emotion. "I'm working, Damien." Isabella continued wrapping her telephoto lens in protective cloth, refusing to look up. "And we've said everything we need to say, have we?" He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were saying quite a lot to Crawford." Isabella's hands stilled on her equipment. There it was. The jealousy she'd been trying to provoke all evening. She'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she felt something much more dangerous, excited. "James was being friendly," she said carefully. "Something you might want to try sometime." "Friendly?" Damien's laugh was harsh. "Is that what we're calling it?" Isabella finally looked up, meeting his blazing blue eyes. The control he'd maintained all evening was unraveling, and she could see the man beneath the mask, angry, possessive, and completely undone. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Crawford was flirting with you and you were encouraging it. So what if I was?" Isabella stood, closing the distance between them until they were almost touching. "I'm a free woman, Damien. Or did you forget that you signed the papers?" Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "I didn't forget." "Then what's your problem?" "My problem," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is watching other men look at you like they want to take you home. My problem is seeing you smile at Crawford, the way you used to smile at me. My problem is—" "Is what?" Isabella challenged, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Is that I can't stand it." The confession hung between them like a live wire. Isabella stared at him, seeing vulnerability she'd never witnessed before. Not in 2 years of marriage, not in all their careful, polite interactions. "You can't stand it," she repeated slowly. "You ignored me for 2 years, treated me like an inconvenience, made me feel invisible in my own marriage, and now you can't stand watching me talk to another man." "Isabella." "No." She stepped back, anger flashing hot and bright. "You don't get to be jealous. You lost that right when you chose to build walls instead of bridges. I was protecting. Protecting what, Damien? Your precious control? Your reputation? Because you sure as hell weren't protecting me." People were starting to notice their heated exchange. Isabella caught sight of Marcus hovering nearby, probably ready to intervene if his boss needed damage control. The thought made her furious all over again. "You want to do this here?" Damien asked, glancing around at the thinning crowd. "In front of everyone? Why not? It's not like we have a reputation to protect anymore." But even as she said it, Isabella knew she didn't want to air their private pain in public. Whatever was happening between them deserved better than becoming gossip for Seattle's business elite. "Terrace," she said curtly. 5 minutes. The hotel's outdoor terrace was mercifully empty, the October air crisp enough to discourage lingering. City lights sparkled below them like fallen stars, and the distant sound of traffic provided a soundtrack to their unraveling. Isabella set down her camera bag and turned to face him. "Talk." Damien loosened his bow tie, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. For a moment he seemed lost, like a man trying to navigate without a map. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally. "Do what?" "Be honest. Be vulnerable. Admit that I was wrong about everything." Isabella crossed her arms, armor against the part of her that wanted to comfort him. "Try." Damien ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. "You want the truth." "The truth is that I've been in love with you since our wedding day, and it terrified me." Isabella's breath caught. "That's not true?" "It is. The moment you walked down that aisle in your grandmother's dress, looking so beautiful and so scared, I knew I was in trouble. This was supposed to be business, Isabella, a merger with benefits. But you looked at me during those vows like you actually believed in them, and You what? I fell, hard, and I panicked. Isabella stared at him, trying to reconcile this confession with 2 years of cold distance. So you decided to hurt me instead. I decided to protect myself, and you. His voice broke slightly. I'd seen what happened when my father actually cared about my mother. The fights, the manipulation, the way love became a weapon. I thought if I kept my distance, we could both avoid that. By making me feel worthless, by keeping you safe from me. Damien stepped closer, his eyes intense. But tonight, watching Crawford look at you, seeing how easily he made you laugh, I realized I wasn't protecting either of us. I was just being a coward. Isabella felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. You're 2 years too late, Damien. Am I? The question hung between them like a challenge. Isabella wanted to say yes, wanted to walk away with her dignity intact. But the way he was looking at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, made her resolve waver. Yes, she whispered, but the word lacked conviction. Then why are you still wearing your wedding ring? Isabella's hand flew to her left ring finger, where the simple band she'd forgotten to remove sat like an accusation. Habit, or hope? Before she could answer, Damien reached out and touched her hand. The first time he'd initiated physical contact in months. His fingers were warm, familiar, and Isabella hated how right they felt against her skin. Isabella, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I hurt you in ways that might be unforgivable. But if there's any part of you that still believes in us— There is no us! The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. There never was an us, Damien. There was you, and there was me, and there was a legal document that bound us together. But there was never an us. You're wrong. Am I? Then where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I spent nights crying myself to sleep because my own husband couldn't stand to be in the same room with me? Where were you when I was drowning in loneliness while sitting right next to you? Each word hit him like a physical blow, and Isabella watched his composure crumble completely. I was there, he said quietly. I was always there, hating myself for hurting you, wanting to reach out, wanting to tell you how I felt. But every time I tried, I remembered my parents' marriage, and I convinced myself that distance was kindness. Distance was cruelty. I know that now. Isabella pulled her hand away, stepping back from the magnetic pull of his proximity. Knowing and doing are different things, Damien. You knew a lot of things for 2 years. You knew I loved photography. You knew I was unhappy. You knew I was slowly disappearing. But knowledge without action is just another form of negligence. What do you want me to do? The question came out raw, desperate. Tell me how to fix this. You can't. Isabella picked up her camera bag, suddenly exhausted. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together. She was almost to the door when his voice stopped her. I love you. 3 words. Simple, devastating. 2 years too late. Isabella turned back, tears finally spilling over. I know, but love without courage, love without action, love without presence. That's not love, Damien. That's just a beautiful way to break someone's heart. She left him standing alone on the terrace, silhouetted against the city lights, looking like a man who'd finally realized what he'd lost. And for the first time since filing for divorce, Isabella wasn't sure if leaving was the right choice or the biggest mistake of her life. The coffee shop was supposed to be neutral territory. Isabella had chosen Café Luna deliberately, a small, cozy place in Fremont that Damien would never frequent. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and baristas with purple hair who definitely didn't recognize the CEO of Johnson Enterprises. It was her world now, not his. She'd been coming here every morning for a week, establishing a routine that felt deliciously normal. Order a lavender latte, find the corner table by the window, edit photos on her laptop while people watching through the rain-streaked glass. It was the kind of life she'd dreamed of during those suffocating penthouse mornings. So when Damien walked through the door at exactly 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, her first thought was that she was hallucinating. He looked completely out of place in his charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes, like a shark that had wandered into a goldfish bowl. The purple-haired barista, Sage according to her name tag, looked him up and down with barely concealed amusement. "Can I help you?" Sage asked, clearly enjoying the novelty of serving someone who probably spent more on ties than she made in a month. Coffee. Black. Large. Damien's usual crisp efficiency seemed forced, like he was playing a role he'd forgotten how to inhabit. Isabella bent lower over her laptop, hoping he wouldn't notice her, but of course he did. Damien's gaze found her immediately, as if he'd known exactly where she'd be. Their eyes met across the crowded cafe, and Isabella felt that familiar jolt of electricity she'd been trying to forget. He looked tired, she realized. The perfectly controlled mask was still in place, but there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. For a moment, neither of them moved. The morning bustle continued around them, students typing furiously on laptops, remote workers taking video calls, retirees reading newspapers with religious devotion. But Isabella felt suspended in time, caught between the urge to flee and the dangerous desire to understand why he was here. Damien paid for his coffee and walked over to her table with the measured stride of a man approaching a negotiation he wasn't sure he could win. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Isabella's instinct was to say yes, she minded very much. This was her space, her routine, her carefully constructed new life. But something in his expression, uncertainty masquerading as confidence, made her nod instead. "How did you know I'd be here?" she asked, as he settled into the mismatched chair that was probably worth less than his watch. "I didn't. I've been coming here every morning for a week, hoping I'd run into you." The confession caught her off guard. "You've been coming here? To Café Luna? Seemed like the kind of place you'd choose. Authentic. Real." He looked around the cafe with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "It's nice, comfortable." Isabella studied his face, searching for sarcasm or condescension, but found none. "It's not exactly your usual scene." "No," he agreed. "My usual scene is sterile conference rooms and overpriced restaurants where everything tastes like ambition." He took a sip of his coffee and made a face. "This is different. Bad different. Honest different." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their last conversation hanging between them like a ghost. Isabella found herself noticing details she'd never paid attention to before, the way Damien's fingers drummed against his coffee cup when he was nervous, the slight crease between his eyebrows when he was thinking, the way he seemed smaller somehow in this space that wasn't designed to showcase power and wealth. "Isabella, don't," she said quickly. "Don't say whatever you're going to say. We're getting divorced. We said everything we needed to say on that terrace." "Did we?" "Yes." But even as she said it, Isabella knew it wasn't true. There were 1,000 things left unsaid, 1,000 moments left unexplored, 1,000 what-ifs that kept her awake at night. "I quit," Damien said suddenly. Isabella's fingers froze over her keyboard. "What?" "The Peterson merger. I walked away from it yesterday." His voice was matter-of-fact, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. 3 years of work, 50 million in potential revenue, gone. "Why would you do that?" "Because it would have required me to relocate to Portland for 6 months, and I realized that moving further away from you was the last thing I wanted to do." Isabella stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he'd just said. The Peterson merger had been his pet project, the deal that would cement Johnson Enterprises as the premier consulting firm on the West Coast. It was everything he'd worked toward for years. "Damien, that's insane. You can't just walk away from opportunities like that." "I can. I did." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Do you know what I realized this week? That I've spent so many years building an empire that I forgot to build a life. And what's the point of having everything if you don't have the one person who makes it matter?" Isabella felt her chest tighten. "You can't put that on me. You can't make me responsible for your life choices." "I'm not. I'm taking responsibility for my own choices. And I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us." "There is no us," Isabella said, but the words felt hollow now. "Isn't there?" Damien reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "Tell me you don't feel anything when you look at me. Tell me that your heart doesn't race when I walk into a room. Tell me that you don't still love me even a little bit, and I'll walk away right now." Isabella opened her mouth to say exactly that, to end this conversation, and the dangerous hope it was kindling in her chest, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she did still love him. Despite everything, despite the pain and the loneliness and the 2 years of feeling invisible, some stubborn part of her heart refused to let go. "Love isn't enough," she whispered instead. "No," Damien agreed. "It's not. But it's a start. And maybe we could build something real this time. Something that's not about business deals or family expectations or protecting ourselves from getting hurt. Something that's just about us." Isabella looked around the cafe, at the mismatched furniture and local art and purple-haired baristas, and tried to imagine Damien in this world, not as a visitor slumming it with the common people, but as someone who belonged, Someone who chose authenticity over appearance, connection over control. "I don't know if you can change," she said finally. "I don't know if I can trust you again." "I don't know either," Damien admitted, "but I'd like the chance to try. I'd like the chance to prove that the man you fell in love with, the one who was too scared to show himself, is still in here somewhere." Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Zara. "Coffee date with Mr. Wright coming by at 10. Don't let me down." She'd forgotten. James Crawford, charming, uncomplicated James who made her laugh and didn't come with 2 years of emotional baggage, was taking her out for a second coffee date. He was exactly the kind of man she should want. Available, interested, emotionally healthy. He was perfect for the new life she was trying to build. But as she looked across the table at Damien, rumpled, vulnerable, fighting for something he'd never learned how to ask for, Isabella realized that perfect wasn't what her heart wanted. Her heart wanted the man who'd spent a week drinking terrible coffee in a cafe that didn't suit him, just for the chance to see her. The man who'd walked away from millions of dollars because it would take him further from her. The man who was finally letting her see behind the mask. "One chance," she said quietly, "but not as your wife, not as Mrs. Johnson, living in your world, playing by your rules. If we do this, we start over, as equals, as two people who choose each other, not two people bound by a contract." Damien's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "As equals." Isabella's phone buzzed again, reminding her of James's impending arrival. She looked at the message, then at Damien, and made a choice that felt like jumping off a cliff. "I have to make a phone call," she said, standing up. "Don't go anywhere." As she stepped outside to cancel her date with James, Isabella caught sight of her reflection in the cafe window. She looked nervous, hopeful, terrified, like a woman about to bet everything on love one more time. Behind her, Damien sat in his mismatched chair, looking more at home in her world than she'd ever thought possible. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something real after all. This felt nothing like their marriage. Isabella stood outside Pike Place Market at 11 a.m. on a Saturday, wearing jeans and a soft grey sweater, clothes that made her feel like herself rather than a trophy wife. The October air was crisp but not cold, and the market buzzed with its usual weekend energy. Tourists snapping photos, locals buying fresh flowers, vendors calling out prices for everything from salmon to handmade jewelry. Damien was already there, leaning against a brick wall near the fish market, and Isabella almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the armor of expensive suits and perfect styling. Instead, he wore dark jeans, a navy blue Henley, and a leather jacket that looked lived in rather than fresh from the boutique. His hair was slightly messed by the wind, and he looked normal, approachable, real. "Hi," he said when he saw her, pushing off from the wall with what looked like nervous energy. "Hi yourself." Isabella couldn't help but smile at how different he seemed. "You look like I don't belong in a boardroom? Like you belong anywhere you want to be." Something warm flickered in his eyes at that. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either, to be honest." Isabella adjusted the strap of her camera bag. She'd brought the Leica, partly for protection, and partly because she couldn't seem to go anywhere without it anymore. "But here I am. Here you are." Damien's smile was softer than any expression she'd seen from him in 2 years of marriage. "So, what do people do on first dates?" The question was so unexpectedly vulnerable that Isabella laughed. "You've never been on a first date?" "Not really. Most of my relationships were—" He paused, looking for the right words. "Business arrangements. Mutual convenience. This is uncharted territory for me." "Well, lucky for you, I'm an excellent tour guide." Isabella gestured toward the market entrance. "Come on, let's start with the basics. Terrible tourist activities and overpriced coffee." They wandered through the market like any other couple, stopping to watch the fish-throwing vendors, sampling honey at the flower stands, arguing good-naturedly about whether the famous gum wall was charming or disgusting. Isabella found herself stealing glances at Damien, amazed by how engaged he seemed with everything, asking vendors about their products, laughing at street performers, even taking photos with her phone when she wanted to capture something with the Leica. "You're different," she said as they shared a bag of mini donuts from Daily Dozen Donut Company. "Different how?" "Present. Like you're actually here instead of thinking about quarterly reports or board meetings." Damien was quiet for a moment, watching a little girl chase pigeons while her parents laughed nearby. "I turned my phone off." "What?" "My phone. I turned it off before I came here. First time in probably 15 years that I've been completely unreachable for more than an hour." Isabella stared at him. What if there's an emergency? Then Marcus will handle it, or it will wait until Monday. He looked at her with something that might have been wonder. Do you know what it's like to walk through the world without constantly checking messages, returning calls, solving problems that couldn't possibly wait 5 minutes? Actually, yes. I lived like that for 30 years before I married you. Right. Damien's cheeks flushed slightly. Of course you did. I guess I forgot that not everyone lives in a state of constant crisis management. They found themselves at a small cafe overlooking Elliott Bay, sharing a window-side table that was probably meant for one person, but somehow fit them both perfectly. Isabella ordered a lavender latte, her new favorite since discovering Café Luna, while Damien surprised her by asking for the same thing. Lavender? Isabella raised an eyebrow. I figured I should try new things. Expand my horizons beyond black coffee, large. When their drinks arrived, Damien took a cautious sip and made a face that was so genuinely confused that Isabella burst out laughing. That's floral, he said diplomatically. It's an acquired taste. Like you? The words slipped out before he could stop them, and both of them froze. It was the kind of flirtatious comment that might have been natural if they were actually strangers on a first date, but carried dangerous weight given their history. I mean, Damien started, but Isabella interrupted him. Yes, she said quietly. Like me. They looked at each other across the small table, and Isabella felt the familiar pull that had always existed between them, the one she'd thought was one-sided, the one that had made their marriage both a blessing and a torture. Can I ask you something? Damien said. Shoot. That night at the gala when you were talking to Crawford, were you actually interested in him, or were you trying to make me jealous? Isabella considered lying, but they'd promised to start over with honesty. Both. James is a good guy, charming, available, uncomplicated, everything you weren't. And the jealousy part? I wanted to see if you still cared, if you'd ever cared. Isabella traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. For 2 years I felt invisible. I needed to know if that was because you didn't see me, or because you were choosing not to look. I was choosing not to look, Damien admitted, because every time I looked at you, really looked, I wanted things I didn't think I deserved. Like what? Like this, sitting in a cafe, sharing terrible floral coffee, talking about nothing important. He gestured around the small space. I wanted ordinary moments with you. I wanted to make you laugh. I wanted to know what you were thinking when you got that little crease between your eyebrows while you read. I wanted to wake up next to you and ask about your dreams instead of immediately checking my phone. Isabella felt her chest tighten. Why didn't you? Because I didn't know how. My parents' marriage was all strategy and appearances. Love was a liability, not an asset. I thought if I let myself feel too much, I'd lose control of everything else. And now I think maybe losing control isn't the worst thing that could happen to me. Damien reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. Maybe the worst thing is living my whole life without ever really living it. Isabella looked down at their almost touching hands and made a decision. She turned her palm up, intertwining their fingers for the first time since their wedding day. Damien's hand was warm, familiar, and she'd forgotten how perfectly it fit with hers. This is terrifying, she whispered. For me too. What if we hurt each other again? What if we don't? They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the ferry boats cut through the grey water outside. Isabella felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice. Behind her, the safety of a life without Damien, but also without the possibility of what they could be. Ahead, the uncertainty of trusting him again, of believing that people could really change. I want to show you something, she said suddenly, pulling out her camera. Isabella had been taking photos throughout their market wandering, candid shots of vendors and street performers, architectural details, moments of human connection. But now she scrolled through to the ones she'd taken of Damien when he wasn't paying attention, him laughing at the fish-throwing display, concentrating seriously on a busker's guitar performance, looking genuinely delighted by a toddler's dance, moves near the flower stands. In every photo he looked relaxed, happy, completely present. I've never seen you look like this, Isabella said, showing him the images. Damien studied the photos with something like amazement. I don't think I've ever felt like this. Like what? Free. Like I can just be, without performing or calculating or managing impressions. He looked up from the camera. Is this what normal people feel like? Isabella laughed. Sometimes when they're with the right person. Am I the right person for you, Isabella? The question was soft, vulnerable, and completely without the confidence that usually armored him. Isabella looked at this man who'd spent a morning turning off his phone, drinking lavender lattes, and chasing pigeons in Pike Place Market, and felt something shift inside her chest. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'd like to find out." Damien's smile was radiant. "I'd like that too." Outside, Seattle hummed with Saturday afternoon energy, but inside their little cafe bubble, it felt like they had all the time in the world to figure out who they could be together. And for the first time in years, that possibility didn't terrify Isabella. It thrilled her. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, final and official. Isabella stared at the legal documents spread across her kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as she read the words that made her officially Isabella Clarke again. 2 years of marriage, dissolved in 3 pages of legal terminology and official stamps. She should have felt relieved, free, victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. Her phone buzzed with a text from Damien. "The papers came today. We should talk." Isabella set the phone aside without responding. They'd been seeing each other for 3 weeks now. Coffee dates, market walks, long conversations that stretched into evening. It had been beautiful, tentative, full of possibility, but it had also been theoretical. A maybe future that existed in the space between their legal marriage and their legal divorce. Now the divorce was real, and everything felt different. Another text, "Please, Isabella, I need to see you." Before she could talk herself out of it, Isabella grabbed her keys and drove to the one place she knew he'd be, the penthouse that had never felt like home. Damien answered the door before she could knock, as if he'd been watching for her. He looked terrible. Hair disheveled, shirt wrinkled, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. In his hand, he held the same set of divorce papers. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We need to figure out what this means," Isabella said, stepping into the familiar space that felt foreign now. "The papers change things." "Do they?" Isabella turned to face him, noting how strange it felt to be back in this cold, perfect apartment. "Of course they do. We're not married anymore, Damien. We're just 2 people who used to be married. And now we're 2 people who are choosing each other. Isn't that better?" "Is it?" Isabella moved to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. "Or are we just playing house, pretending this could work when we both know it can't?" "Why can't it work?" Isabella spun around, frustration boiling over. "Because we're the same people. You're still Damien Johnson, CEO, workaholic, man who doesn't know how to exist without control. And I'm still the woman who needs more than you know how to give. I'm trying to change for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of turning off your phone and drinking lavender lattes doesn't erase 2 years of emotional neglect." Damien flinched, as if she'd slapped him. "What do you want me to do? How do I prove that this is real?" "I don't know." The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. "That's the problem, Damien. I don't know how to trust you again. I don't know how to believe that this version of you, the one who shows up, who pays attention, who actually seems to want me, is permanent." "It is permanent." "How can you be sure? What happens the first time work gets stressful? The first time you have a major deal on the line? Do you think you'll remember to turn off your phone then? Do you think you'll choose me over a multi-million-dollar merger?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella saw the truth flicker across his features. He didn't know either. None of this had been tested by real pressure. "I sold the company," he said quietly. Isabella's breath caught. "What?" "Yesterday. I signed the papers to sell Johnson Enterprises to the Hartwell Group. Eleanor made an offer 3 months ago that I rejected. Yesterday I called her back and accepted." Isabella stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You sold your company? Your life's work?" "My father's life's work. I just inherited it." Damien moved closer, his eyes intense. "You want to know how I can be sure this version of me is permanent? Because I eliminated the thing that made me the other version." "Damien, that's insane. You can't restructure your entire life around a relationship that might not work." "I'm not restructuring my life around a relationship. I'm restructuring my life around myself, around the man I want to be." He reached for her hands, and this time she let him take them. "Do you know what I realized when I was sitting in my office yesterday, looking at quarterly reports and acquisition proposals? I realized I felt nothing. No excitement, no satisfaction, no sense of purpose. It was just obligation. But it was your obligation, your legacy." "No, Isabella. It was my father's legacy, and his father's before him. I've been living someone else's life for 37 years, wondering why I felt so empty." Damien's voice broke slightly. "You were the first thing that ever made me feel alive, and I was so terrified of that feeling that I tried to kill it." Isabella felt tears threatening. "What are you going to do now? You can't just not work." I'm starting over, maybe consulting on my own terms, maybe something completely different. I don't know yet. He smiled, and it was the most genuine expression she'd ever seen from him. For the first time in my life, I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't have quarterly goals or strategic objectives. I just have right now, and what I want right now is you. Damien, I know I hurt you. I know I made you feel invisible and unwanted and alone. I know that 3 weeks of lattes and market walks doesn't undo 2 years of damage. His hands tightened on hers. But I also know that I love you more than I've ever loved anything, and I'm willing to spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you'll let me. Isabella looked into his eyes and saw something she'd never seen before. Complete vulnerability. No masks, no calculations, no strategic positioning. Just a man who had torn down his entire world for the chance to build something real with her. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. What if we mess this up again? Then we'll figure it out together. And if we can't figure it out, at least we'll know we tried everything. Isabella felt the last of her walls crumbling. This wasn't the controlled businessman who had married her for convenience. This wasn't even the tentatively vulnerable man who had been courting her for 3 weeks. This was someone entirely new, someone who had chosen love over security, possibility over certainty. The divorce papers, she said, glancing at the documents still scattered on the kitchen island, mean that we're free to choose each other for the right reasons. And what would those be? Damien cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had fallen. Because you make me laugh. Because you see beauty in ordinary moments. Because you're brave enough to walk away from things that don't serve you. Because you believe in love even when love has disappointed you. Damien, because I've spent 2 years married to you and 3 weeks dating you, and both taught me something important. What's that? That I don't want to live without you. Not because a contract says I have to, and not because it's convenient or strategic or good for business, but because you make me want to be the best version of myself. Isabella stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring 2 years of longing and 3 weeks of hope into the connection. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. So what happens now? She asked. Now we start over, for real this time. No contracts, no family expectations, no business mergers, just us. Isabella looked around the penthouse that had been their prison and smiled. I'm not moving back here. I wouldn't want you to. I'm thinking of selling this place anyway. Too many bad memories. And getting what instead? I don't know. Maybe something with character flaws. Maybe something that needs a woman with excellent taste in mismatched furniture to make it feel like home. Isabella laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. I might know someone who could help with that. I was hoping you would. Outside, Seattle sparkled in the afternoon sun, full of possibilities they were finally brave enough to explore together. The divorce papers lay forgotten on the counter. Not an ending after all, but the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. A love story that was entirely their own. 1 year later, she still returned to the same coffee shop, but everything else had changed. Isabella pushed open the door to Café Luna, the bell chiming its familiar welcome as she stepped into the warm, aromatic embrace that had become her second home. The purple-haired barista, Sage, looked up from the espresso machine and grinned. The usual, Mrs. Johnson? Sage asked, though she was already reaching for the lavender syrup. Actually, Isabella said, her smile bright with mischief, make it 2 today. 2 lavender lattes. Someone's feeling adventurous. Someone's meeting her husband. The word still felt new and wonderful on her tongue, even after a year. Not because they'd remarried, they'd never actually finalized the divorce, but because husband meant something entirely different now. It meant the man who left work at exactly 5:30 p.m. every day to have dinner with her. It meant the person who knew she needed exactly 7 minutes of silence and 1 cup of coffee before she was ready to talk in the mornings. It meant the partner who had driven her to 3 different camera shops last month until they found the perfect vintage lens for her growing photography business. The cafe had become their place in a way the penthouse never was. Every Tuesday and Thursday, they met here for what Damien called mandatory decompression time, a policy he'd instituted not just for himself, but for his entire company. Johnson Enterprises now had the highest employee satisfaction rating in the Pacific Northwest, and Damien had been featured on the cover of Business Weekly with the headline, "The CEO Who Chose Life Over Legacy." Isabella settled into their usual corner table, the one by the window where she'd first seen Damien look completely out of place a year ago. Now he fit here so naturally that tourists sometimes asked him for coffee recommendations. Her phone buzzed with a text. Running 2 minutes late. Marcus called about the Henderson account, told him it could wait until tomorrow. See you soon. The heart emoji made her laugh. Damien had discovered emojis 3 months ago and used them with the enthusiasm of a teenager, much to Marcus's professional horror. Isabella pulled out her laptop and opened the folder labeled Chicago Wedding, her latest photography project. Eleanor Hartwell had been so impressed with Isabella's corporate event work that she'd started referring friends for their personal celebrations. Last weekend, Isabella had photographed an intimate lakeside wedding, and the photos told a story of love that was both passionate and peaceful. She was editing a particularly beautiful shot of the bride's grandmother dancing when familiar hands covered her eyes from behind. Guess who? Damien's voice was warm with playful affection. Isabella pretended to consider. Could it be my devastatingly handsome husband who promised to try new things but still orders black coffee every day? Actually, Damien said, releasing her and sitting down across from her, I ordered a lavender latte today. Isabella looked up to see Sage approaching with their drinks, wearing a knowing smirk. He's been practicing for weeks, Sage confided. Finally worked up the courage to order it without making that face. Traitor, Damien said good-naturedly, accepting his drink. He took a sip and only winced slightly. See? I'm expanding my horizons. One floral coffee at a time, Isabella agreed, leaning across the table to kiss him softly. Even after a year, the simple freedom to kiss him whenever she wanted still felt miraculous. How was your day? Damien asked, gesturing to her laptop. The Chicago wedding? Beautiful. The bride's parents renewed their vows during the ceremony. 40 years of marriage, and they still look at each other like teenagers. Isabella turned the laptop so he could see the photos. It reminded me of something. What's that? Our vows. The original ones. Isabella had been thinking about this for weeks, an idea that both thrilled and terrified her. We said them in a church full of people who were there for business reasons, wearing clothes picked by stylists, reading words written by someone else. Damien's expression grew serious. And now I know what those words actually mean. For better or worse, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, Isabella traced the rim of her coffee cup nervously. I want to say them again, but this time I want to mean them. Damien set down his coffee cup carefully, his blue eyes intense. Are you asking me to marry you, Isabella Clark Johnson? Maybe I am. In that case, Damien reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Isabella's heart stop. Maybe I should ask you first. The entire cafe seemed to pause as Damien slid out of his chair and dropped to one knee beside their mismatched table. Sage gasped audibly from behind the counter, and several other customers turned to watch. Isabella, Damien said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. A year ago you tore up divorce papers because you believed we could build something real. You were right. We built a marriage based on choice instead of obligation, on love instead of convenience, on partnership instead of control. Isabella felt tears starting to fall as he opened the box to reveal not the massive diamond she'd worn before, but a simple, elegant band with 3 small stones, emerald, diamond, and sapphire. Your birthstone, mine, and the stone that represents wisdom, Damien explained. Because you taught me that the greatest wisdom is knowing when to fight for love and when to let it transform you. Damien, so I'm asking you, Isabella Clark Johnson, will you marry me again? Will you choose us again? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that love with courage, love with action, love with presence is the most powerful force in the world? Through her tears, Isabella saw the entire cafe watching them with bated breath. She saw Sage recording on her phone, probably planning to post it to the cafe's Instagram. She saw other couples leaning into each other, perhaps remembering their own proposals, but mostly she saw Damien, not the powerful CEO she'd married 2 years ago, but the man who'd learned to turn off his phone, who danced with her in their kitchen while dinner burned, who brought her coffee in bed every Sunday morning and listened to her dreams like they were the most important business proposals in the world. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. The cafe erupted in applause as Damien slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her thoroughly. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying, Sage appeared with 2 champagne flutes. On the house, she announced. Consider it an engagement gift. How did you... Isabella started. He's been carrying that ring for 3 weeks, Sage explained. Asked me what your favorite flowers were, what time you usually came in, whether I thought you'd say yes. I told him any woman who forgives a man for being an emotional disaster and then helps him become human again is definitely going to say yes to a second chance at forever. Isabella looked at Damien, amazed. 3 weeks? I wanted it to be perfect. But then I realized that perfect isn't what matters. Real is what matters. And this place, this moment, this life we've built together, it's real. They stayed at the cafe until closing time, calling family and friends, making plans for a small ceremony in Pike Place Market where they'd had their first real date. Nothing elaborate or expensive or designed to impress anyone else, just them, their closest people, and vows they'd write themselves. As they walked home to the cozy craftsman house they'd bought in Queen Anne, complete with character flaws and mismatched furniture, Isabella caught their reflection in a storefront window. They looked like any other couple in love, nothing like the powerful businessman and his trophy wife who had posed for society photos 2 years ago. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, as they climbed the front steps of their home. The Empire Building, the high-stakes deals, the feeling of controlling everything. Damien unlocked the door and pulled her into his arms in their entryway, surrounded by her photography prints and his collection of books on sustainable business practices. "I miss the rush sometimes," he admitted, "but I don't miss the emptiness. I don't miss feeling like I was performing my life instead of living it." He kissed her forehead gently. "Besides, I have a new empire now." "What's that?" "This. Us. A marriage built on choice and sustained by daily acts of love. A business that prioritizes people over profits. A life that has room for lavender lattes and dancing in the kitchen and long conversations about dreams." Damien's smile was radiant. "It's a smaller kingdom, but it's infinitely more valuable." That night, as they lay in bed planning their second wedding, Isabella thought about the divorce papers she'd torn up a year ago. She'd thought she was choosing to save her marriage, but she'd actually been choosing to save herself, to believe that love was worth fighting for, even when it seemed impossible. Outside their bedroom window, Seattle hummed with late-night energy, full of people making choices and taking chances, and deciding who they wanted to become. Inside, Isabella and Damien held each other close, two people who had learned that the greatest love stories aren't about finding the perfect person, but about choosing to become the person worthy of the love you want to receive. And as Isabella drifted off to sleep, wearing a ring that represented choice instead of obligation, she knew that their story was just beginning. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't written in boardrooms or sealed with contracts. They're built in coffee shops and market walks, in quiet conversations and brave choices, in the decision to tear up divorce papers because love is worth fighting for. Isabella and Damien learned that true love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about choosing someone imperfect and building something beautiful together, one honest moment at a time. Would you have made the same choice Isabella did, to fight for a love that had hurt you, believing it could become something beautiful? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.